Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience the practical application of business acumen essential for success in today's dynamic professional landscape. I'm Dr. Micheal Darson, and in today's episode, we will discuss how to approach inefficiency in the operating room, the leadership skills necessary to induce change, effective change management, and program improvement methodology. Joining me today for this discussion is Dr. Andrew Harris. Dr. Harris is Associate Professor of Urology at the University of Kentucky, Chief of Surgery at the Lexington VA Medical Center, Chair of the AUA's Workforce Task Force, and Chair-elect of the AUA's Quality Improvement and Patient Safety Committee. Welcome, Dr. Harris. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today to discuss a topic I'm fairly passionate about.
Well, let's get started. Why should we care, and what role do we have, or is this somebody else's job to do?
Yeah, I appreciate your question. And when you think about efficiency in the operating room, it's something many of us feel. And from the workforce perspective, we take a look at burnout quite frequently, and it's been a fairly hot topic among several articles published recently and in the past several years. And we know that, in the mid 30% or so of our workforce is burnout, and there is some discrepancies based on gender. And some of the things that do lead to this burnout is frustrating every day. We can't get predictable times of when we get to go home. We schedule our day, and sometimes the day gets inefficient and we're there longer and we miss dinner with our families, or it's just frustrating and we're mentally spent by the last case of the day. And that really hurts us as providers. I think there's good data to suggest also from a healthcare value perspective that when we are mentally exhausted or we're feeling burnout, the care that we provide may not be quite up to the level of when we're fresh and we're excited to be at work, right? So when you look at that outcomes and experience over cost equation of healthcare value, we should care about not getting beat up through OR inefficiency and really losing our mental steam by the end of the day. And I love the definition of insanity, right? And that is doing the same thing all the time and expecting a different result, right? So we wake up, we're excited to go to work, and then there's issues in the operating room that happen, and they just happen frequently over our careers or over our weeks and months, and that can be really, really frustrating. So I think those are some reasons why we should really care, and to start to look at that, changing how we think about healthcare. And one of the pictures that came out during COVID really struck me very significantly. I have 4 kids at home, and they are big into superheroes and Marvel and those things. And if you remember the picture that came out with all of the superheroes lined up on the side of the walls and the masked physicians and nursing staff and hospital staff walking down the corridor of superheroes, saying that during that time, healthcare, we were really, really providing a wonderful service and a scary service at that time, but we were kind of like superheroes, and that's what we do every day when people lay their lives in our hands, and the staff of which we work in their hands as well. And what that hit me with is we're lucky to get to do what we do every day. And when we think about other people who may have not got into medical school, our urology is very competitive. People who may have not got into urology, I have a feeling some of those people would love to trade places with us, right? And be there. And so I approach it when something doesn't go well in the operating room, or it's inefficient, or the turnovers are taking, or the instruments are wrong, of, you know what? I'm lucky to get to do what we do every day. And that changes the lens to which we discuss some of those issues in the OR. It becomes less, that's the nurse's fault, right? And it becomes more of, let's take a look at that and let's figure out how we can make it better. The other thing I think that is important to remember, nobody shows up helping for bad outcomes. Nobody shows up hoping something bad happens today. Nobody shows up and said, man, I hope Dr. Darson's turnover times are 3 times as long as they normally are, because that's going to be great, right? Everybody shows up working as hard as they can. I think when you remember that, then you look at when you don't have the right instruments and you don't think it's someone's fault, you start to look at the process and say, you know what, I know you wanted to have all the right instruments today. Let's talk about why you weren't successful and how can I help you, right? And I think that helps us have a better approach to quality improvement in the operating room. And if we can step back to burnout a little bit, we also know that those outcomes may suffer when people are burnt out, but they also may suffer during the day when people start to leave, right? If you're doing a big kidney case at 7 p.m. and it's a 18 centimeter mass and it may involve the cava and those things, and the case goes a little bit sideways and your consultants are there, the patient may not do as well, right? Or when we have some of our key staff that helps us during the day and they leave, sometimes the day doesn't go as well. So there are multiple issues that can make the OR sometimes difficult. And when we can get our day going the right way, we have what we need, we have the staff we need, and we can finish when we want to finish, we can mitigate many of those risks. And I think the other thing that we have to remember too is a lot of our reimbursement models that can sometimes be challenging in the operating room are based on volume and sometimes less so on efficiency. And what I mean by that is if I want to do a certain number of RVUs, I got to stay till the day's done, right? And sometimes the alignment in the rest of the operating room is not the same. People have different goals, right? And so when we look at how do we maximize everybody to be moving in the same direction in the OR, sometimes that has to do with incentives. But then we remember, if we can move that way through the operating room, our patients do better, staff's happier, we feel more fulfilled in our jobs, and then we can all win. So those are just a couple of reasons as why all of us should really care about how the operating room works and really look through a lens of how can we help instead of can you just please make the room go better.
Yeah, let me point out what a great perspective to start out with by, just understanding that we're lucky to be doing what we're doing. And also the point about, nobody shows up at the day and says, hey, I hope these outcomes are poor, or I hope the operating turnover time is 3 times as normal. So that's really a great perspective to start out with. Regarding burnout, if you look at health policy surveys, electronic medical record documentation, those are always really high on the list. What is your perspective on where does the inefficiencies of the OR rank on these lists?
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. The AUA data suggests that main drivers for kind of barriers to professional success differ by gender. With our women colleagues, it tends to be lack of control over the schedule, which has a lot to do with the operating room, right? When do I get to operate? How much time do I get? How many cases can I put in? And those things. With men, it tends to be time. And that's how we have asked those questions in the AUA census. Exactly where the OR ranks in there, I don't have any data to suggest to you. However, anecdotally, I would say many of us feel at home in the operating room. And that is why we went into surgery. And so when those days go well, we feel extremely fulfilled. There is a lot of the EMR that we have to deal with in clinic and some of the administrative inefficiencies we have to deal with outside of the operating room, which many of us do not enjoy. And the data does bear that out. And the EHR does rank high on burnout lists for us as professionals. And when the OR goes well, we feel great. And so when it doesn't go well, we're already having trouble outside the operating room, right? And so when that day doesn't go well, it doesn't help from a burnout perspective because that is another example of a process that's compounding our already burned out processes. So I don't know where exactly it ranks, but in enough inefficient processes, especially where we love to be, it's almost like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I don't know if the AUA has done this, but to look at the inefficiencies in the OR and stratify it by age, because I know as the older I've gotten, the less tolerant I've gotten with, increasing turnover times and that kind of stuff. So definitely need to look at my own perspective in regards to that. You also mentioned the alignment of certain personnel in the OR may not be aligned with the surgeon. Maybe we can go over that a little bit in a later point, but I find that a fascinating point, and how to bridge that gap should be interesting. Let's talk about the leadership principles necessary. How do we induce change in the operating room?
Yeah, I appreciate your question. And this one is challenging. And the reason it's challenging is because of how we think as surgeons. And maybe I won't lump everybody else into this category. So I will say how I used to think as a surgeon. I like immediate gratification. That's why I did surgery. I like to spend a couple hours in the operating room, have immediate change on a patient, and then move on. And in the operating room, we're very used to putting out our hand and asking for something, and it's put in our hand, right? Trying to approach OR efficiency that way or inefficiency is very difficult because we don't carry the same amount of credibility in inducing change as we do in operating on a human. And when we approach it the same way of I'm the leader here, and if it comes across in a way as hemostat now, that sometimes is not well received by the other people who want to be involved in the change. And so really it's how do you start to understand that team? How do you be a servant leader and serve that team? Because we have lots of pull around the OR because we're influential, because we're the attending surgeons. And so instead of saying I'm the attending surgeon, I think the problem is this, the solution is this, go, it can be more of, what do you all feel the problem is? What are your struggles with? What barriers can I help get out of your way so that you can function at the top of the level of your knowledge base so that you have a great productive day in the OR? Because we know that if the instruments are there, the staff is there, the room is clean, if all of those things are done in a timely manner, you know what, we're going to move just fine. So how can I help understand what the issues are? How can I be your partner and help with a solution instead of being the one sitting back and saying, our turnover team is just awful, it's just too long? How can I get in there and help and just take a look? Or how can I be a voice to leadership that we're having trouble with various issues that I see in the operating room? And really, how do you serve others and be that sounding board and help grow them? And if you have someone in the operating room that is having an issue, man, I tell you, the credibility that you build, if you can help one of the scrub technicians, the people cleaning the rooms, the nursing staff, you can use some of your influence to help serve those, to help them have a better day. Man, the amount of buy-in that you get and credibility you get to try to make things better is impressive. And you will see that in project numbers 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when you start to learn a little bit, how do you grow people? It's like, hey, it looks like you're really having trouble today. You're really having trouble getting the instruments today. Can we have a discussion about what's going on? No, let me teach you how we can kind of walk through this process. And let me help get you in front of the right people. And let's have this discussion together and see if we can make it better. And what those things do is that empowers people. We really want people in the operating room environment to speak up because they know what's frustrating. And that happens in our OR not infrequently here at the VA. And they will bring ideas to us. I don't feel safe because. I feel inefficient because. I am frustrated today because. And then we can empower them by taking a look at those from a very serious lens to be, if we can validate that as a real problem or not. Was this a one-off, or is this something we fight with every day? And I can give you an example of that if you want one. We were, one of our scrub technicians didn't feel safe in the intraoperative handoff. And, we take that for granted a lot, right? Like, when's the last time, Dr. Darson, that you looked back and said when somebody was switching the cases and just kind of really watched what they did? I don't do it very often. I never have. And right. They didn't feel safe because their comment was, we go into a robot case, it's dark. It's hard to see the body because the robot's all covered up. The screen is very zoomed in, and the lack of lighting makes it hard to see what's on the table. And so I'm just afraid I'm going to mess up. I don't know where the instruments are that you might need. If there's a specimen laying on the table, I may not know what that is. And so what they did by bringing that up was allow us to really take a serious look at that and see if it was a problem. And so we measured it, and it was a problem. We were not doing a standardized handoff very well. And we hadn't had any safety events, so that was great. But we want them to feel safe in the OR. And we standardized the handoff. And now it's great. So if we're getting ready to go on clamp on a partial, they'll say, Harris, we're going to switch. Is that okay? And I have the opportunity to say, you know what, this is really not a great time. We're getting ready to go on clamp. Can you guys wait about 30 minutes? So that was a great. Another one we found out was the staff was frustrated about having to pick disposables for the case. And so the case cart was coming up relatively empty, just with the metal on it, or the stainless steel on it. And we started watching, and we were spending 15, 20, 25 minutes a case picking disposables, suction tubing, ports, all that kind of stuff. And then we just had a discussion. And then we got that moved to probably a more responsible party to do that, dropped those turnovers by 15 to 20 minutes, and their life was much better. But that only happens when you listen or you watch and understand why people are frustrated. And is that a real reason that we should go after to try to make things better? And in those two instances, both of them were.
Yeah, those are great examples. So, in the academic institution, sometimes there are already committees and that kind of stuff set up for this. How would you advise a private practice urologist? Because there's, in my opinion, oftentimes a little bit more of a disconnect between the hospital staff and the private practitioners that are coming in. How would you advise a private practice urologist to start to do some of the things that you just mentioned? Analyze the situation, try to help empower people, and just start the process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, and that's can be always very challenging is where to start. And one of the ways that we feel is best to start is just by communicating. Communicate. Talk to the front line, see what their frustrations are. Talk to top line leadership and understand from their perspectives what are their goals for the operating room or the things that you're looking at. And usually their goals align pretty well with what the frontline staff want to do. We want to have the right instruments. We want to be able to move cases through an efficient manner, and then start working towards studying the current state of really what is going on. And if we can figure out, like in our situation, we mapped it and then we measured it, that we really weren't signing out very well, and it was taking a long time to get those extra disposables, and just really empowering those, being a voice to empower those frontline staff with leadership support to go ahead and make those changes, move things in the right direction. That's the way I would suggest to start, is just by talking to people, figuring out what the priority is, talking with leadership, making sure they're on board. And when you have the leadership support, that empowers the frontline to feel okay trying something different, right? And sometimes just that brokering between the attending physician and leadership and frontline is all you need to get going.
What special advice do you give your chiefs regarding this every year?
Our chief residents?
Yeah.
Is really just to be involved, right? Not everybody loves to do the QI stuff, and that's fine. But what I tell a lot of our teams is that you're a leader whether you want to be or not. You're going to come out into the world as an attending urologist, whether you're in private practice or whether you go into academics. You're going to be a leader by default, and people are going to look to you to set the tone. So if you have the tone of which we have already spoken, you'll be able to move things in the right direction. If you choose the tone of I'm going to sit back and that's somebody else's problem, that's going to be a more difficult career track to run.
All right, we've talked a little bit about trying to understand. Can you go into a little bit more detail about understanding the issues affecting the OR and solutions in that regard?
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts. So I was doing a cystectomy one time in residency, and I was a chief resident, and I thought that I was, about ready to go tackle the world. And this was an older sick person. We were getting ready to do a cystectomy. Attending physician comes in at the beginning because the patient needed to get off the table fairly quickly. The attending physician went so efficient that even as a chief resident, I couldn't keep up with him. And it was very humbling for me. And at the end of the case, I looked at him and I said, wow, that was really impressive. And he looked at me and said, Andrew, that was 3 hours and 30 years, not just 3 hours. And so one of the things that I think we have to think about is we're so used to making decisions very quickly. And we don't take a lot of time to understand, because that's what residency was for. That's what our continuing learning is for. When we see a patient in the clinic, we already kind of know what we're doing because of the experience that we've already had as we went through our training and as we've moved through our career. So if you can see a new prostate cancer patient in 25 minutes, it's not really 25 minutes, it's 25 minutes plus your career. So for me, it's 20 years and 25 minutes, right? It's not just 25 minutes. And why that's important is we cannot take that same thought logic into the problems in the operating room, because we haven't necessarily spent that amount of dedication in learning how processes work. So the first step is always seek to understand the issues that affect that OR. Figure out what's important to the institution, what's important to the staff, what's important to the surgeons. How can we pick priorities that align everybody swimming in the same direction? And when we talk about what's important to everybody, I love to talk about communication. And when we can't communicate well, these understanding techniques or understanding priorities become very difficult. And when I give a talk in person or to groups on Zoom about how we fight frustration using quality improvement, and I love to be interactive with the group and ask everybody to draw something. And I always ask them to draw a pig. And the reason is I have pulled from one of the University of Michigan presentations, a standardized pig drawing. But I don't tell people that in the beginning. And as you would imagine, nobody draws the same pig. Some people draw just the face. Some people draw facing left, facing right. Some get the squiggly tail. Some don't. And then I'll ask people like, well, why didn't everybody draw the same pig? And one is I gave really bad instructions. But secondly is we've all had different experiences. And if you want to understand how to make the OR better, you got to understand everybody has not done the same thing that we have in our training. Nursing training is different. Tech training is different. How they clean the rooms, their thought process is going to be different. And understanding that we're all different by the way our past experiences have led our thought processes is so important because we have to get on the same page to start, right? If I tell you, and I have to be very honest, this has been very humbling for me as a teaching perspective to learn that I don't always explain things very well to residents. I think I explain them great, right? But then they don't do exactly what I ask. And so I ask them to pull their head out of the robot and I say, what did you hear? And then I'm like, that is not what I was trying to explain. How can I explain this better, right? Because if we're not on the same page, understanding one another becomes very, very difficult. Then what we do is we all have the standardized picture of the drawing. Everybody's drawing is about the same. And to me, that is so important. If you want to seek to understand the problem, everybody's got to understand the problem. Everybody's got to be on the same page. Everybody's got to be able to draw the same thing that we're talking about. And once you can do that, then you can start learning how people prioritize and moving in the right direction. And so communication, when you want to work through these, is so important because when you come to trying to have something different happen, if I ask Dr. Darson to do something, but Dr. Darson interprets it differently than I meant for it to be interpreted, and then I go study it, well, then I may not know that you did it differently than I was talking about, and then think our intervention didn't work because the data didn't go the right way, right? So I cannot stress the ability to communicate and understand enough as we discussed today.
Yeah, some really interesting concepts there. I love the pig idea. I mean, if you ask them, you're going to get all these different drawings, but if you show everybody the drawing, meaning everybody on the same page, everybody's going to then draw the same pig. So that's a fascinating example, and one that really applies to this topic really well. What are some tools that are out there now that maybe people could utilize so they're not kind of reinventing the wheel with all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when people want to start kind of getting into this, that is a question we get is, well, what should I do? One of the best tools I love in quality improvement is what's called a process map. And a process map is very easy to do. It is essentially just writing down the steps of the process. And the reason it is so powerful is it is a visual representation of what we think is happening. And it is very different when you get a group together and you walk through a process as if you are compared to when you just ask one person to explain something. Because like, oh, that's not very complicated. And you're like, that sounds great. Walk me through the steps. And before you know it, you're on step 20. And then they look at it and be like, that is kind of more complicated than I thought it was. Or it allows you to see inefficiencies, right? Anytime somebody has to make a decision, that is notated if you learn how to do a process map. And the more times people have to make decisions in a process, that is or tends to increase the variability of the outcome of the process because we have to have people stopping and thinking. What we want to do is we want to have processes where just A, B, C, not A, B, and then I need to think between C, A, and C, B, if that makes sense. So putting it all on a visual map really is, again, getting everybody on the same page. You can see what we're doing. It allows people to ask questions. Harris, why are you doing that? And then I can talk about it. They're like, oh, you don't need to do that. We're already doing that. Oh, great. Well, then I guess we can take that out of the map, right? As you start to go forward. So really, a process map is one of my favorite usages of QI methodology. We use it on almost every project. And with the amount of information we learn by getting a group of people together and walking through a process, it never ceases to amaze me what we learn. And so the other thing that I would say is just getting people together. If you want to fix things in the operating room, the surgeon can't do it by themselves. The nurse can't do it by themselves. The scrub tech can't do it by themselves. And a manager can't do it by themselves. Get everybody in the room. I get one person from each of the groups and talk about it. And so most of the stuff's not really that complicated. It just changes a little bit of the way that we normally think. So get everybody together, talk about it, understand what everybody's doing. And then a lot of times you really don't have to guess on how to make it better.
So building a team, obviously composed of the stakeholders, agreeing on the plan, the process map sounds very important. How do you keep going forward from that point?
Yeah, another great question. So a lot of times the way people fail is they try to do too much too fast, right? So we spend a lot of time understanding the current state, figuring out what measure we want to influence, right? Is it turnover time? Is that it? Or is it case cart preparedness? You name it. But understanding how to measure. Then we get that team together. We agree on a plan, but it's a small cycle of change every time. So instead of saying, you know what, I think I've got turnover time figured out, we're going to do it in all 60 rooms tomorrow, right? That usually doesn't work very well. We're going to do it in one Harris turnover tomorrow. We're going to see how that works. And then our group will come back together. This is what we saw. These are what our measures are. These were our process measures. These were our outcome measures. Did they go the right direction? Did the process happen the way we thought it should? Great. Now tomorrow, let's do 2 or 3. That works. Now let's do 2 rooms. That worked. Now let's do 6 rooms. And then we grow from there. But it is always a very calculated growth plan so that you can keep your hands around the process, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you try to implement change too fast and 2 or 3 things go off the rails, sometimes getting those people back to try again can be really challenging. So I would stress measure, 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 start small, grow slow, and have a very purposeful plan on how you review what you think you're trying to improve. Because I'm sure you've been in these meetings too, where you sit in a meeting, somebody says we should fix problem A, people throw money at problem A. 6 months later, people ask, did we spend the money the right way? And people look at it and say, I don't know, I think it's better. Right. So what we want to be able to do is we want to sit and say that metric's improved by 42%. Here's our return on investment. Right. So you want to know if what you're doing is influencing the process. And if it is not, then you go back to the drawing board. You never really fail, right? You learn. It's like, okay, we thought this would work. It didn't work. So now let's talk about why it didn't work, and let's go try another PDSA cycle, next week in a Harris turnover or something like that.
Yeah, I like the idea of realistic expectations. So that's a really good place to start. And especially if all the stakeholders agree on the plan, right? So what is your recommendation for how often to kind of touch base with these improvements?
Yeah, I appreciate that question also. And I think it depends on what stage of the process you're in. And so if you're in the planning process, it depends on when you want to start making your change. But we tend to meet more on a weekly or every other weekly basis in the beginning. And then once we come up with a change management plan of, hey, we're going to try this new process in Dr. Harris's room tomorrow or next week, then we would set the meeting after whenever we could run that cycle. So if the cycle is going to be 1 turnover, then it might be the next week. If it's going to be, we want to run it for a week or 2, then it might be 2 or 3 weeks later, so we have time to crunch the data. And then as you develop the project, that timeline changes. And so as you implement into other rooms, you might need a month, right? Until you come back. And then once you have the process and you're happy with the way it is, you got to go in sustainability mode. So then it may become quarterly for a year, annually subsequently, to make sure you don't lose track of the project. Because I'm sure you've seen many times there is a great initial push and then it falls apart. 6 months later, people are like, what happened? So I think how often you meet depends on which part of the process you're in, usually more in the beginning, and then it kind of spaces out as you start to implement.
Well, it's pretty clear that you and the University of Kentucky are far ahead of a lot of places. How long have you had an interest in this?
That's a wonderful question. And I started getting interested in this particular topic back in 2012, 2013. And it was only because of something that happened to me in the operating room. I was doing a kidney stone case. Ureteroscope was up the ureter, staring at the stone, ready to start lasering, asked for the laser fiber, not one in the room. They go out to get the fiber, not one on the shelf, not one downstairs, not one in the hospital. Had to drive to neighboring hospital to get the laser fiber and bring it back. And my response initially was inappropriate. And it was more of, well, who should be fired, right? And that was the wrong approach. And interestingly enough, so my dad runs and my brother run a lean consulting business worldwide. And so I started asking my dad, or just telling him about my day, and he started asking me all these questions. Well, what were their barriers to success? What's their normal protocol? How often is that delivered? How do they know when you need new fibers? When do they start to check for the fibers for the case? All these questions that as a surgeon I just never thought of. Like, I don't know. Why is that my problem? Like, I just want the stuff. Well, it became my problem real quick that day when I didn't have it. And so that kind of launched a love of just quality improvement and how do we do things better? How do we understand how we fit in as part of the team? And really, it takes the whole system for us to be successful in taking care of patients. And I think understanding how we fit into that system can really have a dramatic effect on how we view the system, as well as we can help move it forward.
Yeah, it's amazing, these examples in this discussion. It really illustrates how a global approach to improving the OR efficiencies really ultimately results in us being happier as surgeons and, most importantly, better patient outcomes.
I agree 100%.
Well, thank you, Dr. Harris. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I appreciate the time, to be with you today, Dr. Darson. I appreciate the questions and the discussion. Obviously, a topic I'm very passionate about. I would suggest people, if they're interested, please feel free to reach out to me, and have the courage and to get involved. You'll be amazed what you find. Administrative groups love when surgeons get involved trying to make things better, and especially if you can approach it from a team perspective, you'll have great success. And surgeons are leaders everywhere we are. We carry a lot of political clout just because of who we are, and if we can use that to influence in a positive nature our work lives, our patient outcomes, and ultimately our work-life balance and the work-life balance of those that are around us, I think we all win.
Well stated. Well, thank you, Dr. Harris, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. We all really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for joining us on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast.
Thank you for joining us today on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's insights valuable. Remember, growth is a continuous process. To further enhance your business acumen and accelerate your professional development, explore the AUA's Institute for Leadership and Business track on demand by visiting the AUA University at auau.auanet.org and simply click on the program icon. The ILB track on demand features 9 courses covering a wide range of leadership and business topics that will empower you to lead effectively and achieve your professional goals. Invest in your future by visiting auau.auanet.org and register for the ILB track on demand today. Until next time, continue to learn, lead, and excel.